I'd like to welcome you to Change My Relationship. I'm excited. We have a special guest on today. Her name is Liz Woolley. She has been a warrior in the battleground of the video game addiction war for almost 20 years. Her career was in information technology for 30 years. She's been a software programmer, systems analyst, upgrade specialist, and technical support administrator. Been involved in multiple 12-step programs, and she actually has been on the Dr. Phil Show, 48 Hours, CBC Marketplace, Fox Nation's Deep Dive, and NPR Radio, and a number of newspapers. But today we're going to have her talking about her personal story of her son, Sean, who got involved in video gaming addiction and completely changed his personality and his life to the point in just a few years, he actually took his life due to the depression and the downward spiral that he went through because of video gaming. It's a tragic story, but she has turned it into a program to help others and to get the word out. Today, we're going to focus on the personal part, as I said, and then we're going to spend some time getting into more of the research and the details about why video gaming is such a tragic addiction and why more needs to be talked about and more needs to be done to change this. So I'd like to welcome you, Liz.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm glad that I was introduced to you. So why don't we start off with just tell our listeners about Sean as a little boy. What was he like?
Well, I have four children, and Sean was the third. I have three sons and one daughter, and um, he was a very sensitive person. He was gentle. He was not like competitive into sports. He liked sports, but he wanted to play and enjoy them and have fun with them. He wasn't into the like, I gotta be the best or I gotta win. um, and he was pretty adventurous. I think of all my children, he was in the emergency room more than all the rest of them put together. Um, some of the stuff he did, I'm questioning, like, why are you doing that? You know, stop it. Like one of the things, he was running next to a train and I'm just freaking out. I'm chasing him, like, come back, get away from the train. And I think later in his childhood, he was diagnosed with ADD. And I think that had something to do with him, doing stuff without thinking about it.
Definitely, the research shows that young people with ADD are very much risk takers, and they engage in a lot more risk-taking activity.
Yep, he did. He was pretty was compliant, and he did what I asked him to do. When he was like a teenager, then he got a job when he was 15 at the local Hardee's. And I think that really boosted him because it gave him kind of a sense of purpose and they loved having him there. And it gave him something to do. He had actually been playing video games for like 10 years before he ran into problems with them. And that was because they were the video games that were actually made for entertainment. Mm-hmm. And they had a beginning and an end. And it was like, okay, so when he was done with the game, it was just done. He didn't have to come back for anything or stay on it.
What were some examples of those games? I think they're ones that people would remember from the very beginning.
I think Doom was one of them.
Those were the ones that you're not worried about.
Right. Let's see. He played Doom 2, Solitary, Pac-Man, Siberia, Mortal Kombat 2.
Yeah.
So those were, all games back then that some of them were kind of violent, but they had to end. I mean, they weren't made to get him addicted to it. Um, he enjoyed his younger brother and his sister. They got along really well, supporting each other. And he was just a good kid. He went to catechism, and he got confirmed. Um, so he wasn't a mean person.
Mhm.
None of my children were. So it was just kind of like a normal person.
And his birth father wasn't involved in his life.
His father was not involved.
And then he did have a stepdad that you said he
Did
got
have a
very
stepdad.
close to, and then your marriage to him ended. And so he did lose that stepfather. And I think that those things do affect our children, but I'm going to say in your case that as you're going to explain and roll out in this program and probably the follow up that we do, this video gaming addiction, it can catch anybody.
Right. And the thing is, with his stepfather, he still, visited him,
Mhm.
a lot, every other weekend and stuff like that. They
Oh,
went on trips together and stuff. So
nice.
he was still part of that family.
Yeah. So
Um,
that definitely minimized any loss that he had
mhm,
with that.
right.
So, and then you said as a teenager, what happened?
Um, well, he went into the teen years, which we all do.
Hmm.
And I know there was a point where he seemed unhappy, and he had written an article for school about it, and I kept the article. It's in the book. But he was just saying, he doesn't know why he's alive. And I'm like, well, that's kind of sad, but I thought about my teenage years and I had the same thoughts.
A lot of
So,
teens do.
right. And I think that was before he got his job at Hardee's, because once he got that job, he was a lot happier.
And you
And
did say that he did have to switch from a private Catholic school that was smaller, where he was a little less difficult for him to socially interact, and that when he switched to the public school, he did have trouble with that, which all
yes,
kids do when they're when they get into a new school, especially in teen years.
yeah.
And you also said that he did get involved in band, which did give him kind of an identity and purpose, and he really liked that.
And his older brother and his older sister, both were in band. And, I just thought music was important in their lives. And so he went into band also, and he was in the marching band and the yearly band. Um, so that gave him more activities to do.
Hmm.
And he was like very creative. He did multiple instruments. He would switch between them, and he was also very artistic compared to my other children. And his story writing was absolutely amazing. I mean, he'd have to write stories for school, and I'd read them, and I'd be like shocked. I'm like, wow, he's such a, creative writer, made it, that you wanted to read it, and it wasn't just, slapping it on paper to get the assignment done. Um, and his drawing and everything was, um, immaculate, and he would go into detail and use all the different colors. So, you know, he was just special that way with his creativeness and, his sensitivity. Um, really something that I appreciated.
Yeah. Okay, so you said he played kind of the benign video games that a lot of kids play during his childhood and teen years. When
He
did
did
he?
not. I was with my job in IT. Um, I had to get a computer, so
Mhm.
we were like one of the first ones on the block to have the computer. I never allowed video gaming consoles
Mhm.
into my house. I
Okay.
said, if you want to play, we've got the computer. You can play the games on the computer.
So they didn't have those Nintendo Switches
No,
and all those kinds of
none
things,
of
the
that.
boxes where they were hooked up to the TV night and day.
Yeah, I didn't even want him to have a Game Boy, but I think the dads bought him one.
Mhm.
But, you know, I never bought them any of those gaming things. And, you know, I just didn't think it was necessary. And I thought it was a waste of time.
Mhm.
Like you've got the computer, you can share it because I didn't want him to be doing it too much. Just have it as a fun activity,
So you
side
had
activity.
a computer in the house with 5 people, 4 kids and an adult, and you needed the computer for your job. So it's not like it was there 24/7. So
Yeah.
when did you see a change in him? What, I think you said it was the EverQuest game that
Mhm.
he started playing. So maybe you could explain what that game is and then how that began to affect him.
That game was one of the first. It wasn't the first, but let make maybe the second or third game that was actually designed by the designers to get people addicted to it. So that was one of their goals when they made that game. And I even, you know, have a quote from the person that helped make it, that was, you know, they're trying to make them compelling and as addicting as possible.
And what was different that made it addicting? Was it
The
hidden
one
stuff
thing,
or the nature
it
of the
was
game?
several things. It was online, first of all, so now it connected to everybody in the world.
Uh-huh.
The second thing was there was no end. It was like a virtual society.
Um,
And in the games, they could have holidays, they could do whatever they want so they wouldn't have to participate in their real life. Um, and it was
so that means they took on an identity that they were in that game and they interacted with other people who had identities and they had like a life, right? They did
that was
things,
their life. That was their
they buy
internet,
things
their
and build
game
a
life.
house, all of that.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
they interacted. And did tragic things happen in there? I mean, could you lose things? Could you?
Yes. And he actually had it. Of course, people would try to kill other people so that they could get their loot. That's what they
Okay.
call it. And um, he he didn't participate like a lot of the others. Him and another person buddied up in the game, and they didn't like the banks, so they would hold each other's money and loot and stuff when the other person wasn't playing. And one time, this person that held his stuff, I mean, they'd been doing that for quite a while, 5, 6 months, something like that. He took all the loot and never came back.
Oh,
And Sean was like, you know, he trusted this person because by then he was deciding he liked the gaming life and the people in the games better than real life
mm,
because now he was a young adult and he was into the adult world, and some things were happening in the adult world where he's meeting adults that weren't really caring and they were bullies. And he had never come up against that before because in our family, you know, I protected them. And you know, we tried to be kind to each other.
mm.
Um, but when he came up, you know, against people who are, you know, just mean, you know, he didn't like that. And uh, so he kind of wanted to go back into his childhood, but he was like 20 years old and you
Yeah.
can't go back.
Well, and that
And
would be a huge betrayal for somebody, for you to trust somebody for 6 months. And, I think the thing is that people don't realize is that when you're taking on a identity, and this is going to get much worse as technology advances, because they're talking about having avatar, I'm not an expert on gaming, you are, but they're talking about having a complete different like virtual reality where it's going to be even more confusing, and to people who are struggling in real life or who just
mhm.
get caught up in that, it is going to be very dangerous and very easy for them to get affected. But I can see how that would be a huge betrayal for him and be really confusing, especially at the age that he was at and when he wasn't having a lot of success socially. And didn't he lose his job at Hardee's, or was that
No, he
right?
left that job because he went on to school to be a graphic artist.
Hmm.
And so he had left that job on his own. Um, but then in the school, it was a VOTEC school, and the instructor was hardly in the class at all.
Okay.
And so he, coming out of high school, you think that there's going to be somebody there if you have questions or to teach you. And so he was not happy with the school, and he didn't feel like he was learning a lot. And I ended up talking to the instructor, and her response to me was, well, I don't have to be in that class all the time babysitting them. So I was like, okay, is that what you think you're there for? So he ended up dropping
Hmm.
that. And that's when he went on to, he got a job at the local like hardware store called Menards. And there his boss was a bully and bullied him there. And so he left that job. So these are things that are happening, you know, quite quickly after he was out on his own.
Hmm.
And that's when he was like, what is going on here? This isn't how I thought it was going to be. He thought the adults were going to protect him and want to keep him safe, and to help him. And so he just, it was like new to him. Um, and he didn't like it. And
But the video gaming, because he's even at 20, when did he move out of your house? You had asked him to leave
20
because
years
he,
old.
20
Yeah.
years old, and the video gaming had gotten to the point. What was happening that you had to ask him to leave?
Okay, so the first time he moved out, he had just turned 20, and so for his birthday, he took his birthday money and bought the EverQuest game.
Hmm.
So when he bought that game, none of us thought anything bad. We're like, oh yeah, another computer game, blah blah. And within 3 months of buying that game, it had affected him so bad that he had gotten a new job, and he was um, a district manager, or not district, associate manager at Domino's. And after getting this game, he was playing it. He had already he moved away from the house, not because I made him, but because he was growing up and he had a job, he had a car. So he moved away and he got a room, and he had, he was doing really good. And then he got this game. And so when he was at this new house, he just got pulled into the game, and he was playing it too much. I wasn't there to say, get off the game. He was on his own now. And he had epilepsy, but up until then, it was controlled with medication. He
Hmm.
had never had seizures as long as he was taking his medication. And as he was playing the game, he stopped taking his medication, and then he started having seizures. And that's what happened with his job. He had a grand mal seizure, and it was the city the town celebration. You have one a year, and it was that same weekend that it was. And so they needed him at work. He had to be at work. So he shouldn't have went to work because of the seizure, because it takes him like a couple of days to recover from it. But
Yeah.
he went to work anyway, and he was just like, he was just dragging through it. And then it was time for somebody to go home, and he asked his boss if he could go home early because he just wasn't feeling well. And the boss kind of said, well, no, we need you here. And they sent somebody else home. Well, he was just, pretty much beyond functioning. So he was so upset again. Here he'd asked an adult for help and was turned down. He just walked out, and he never went back.
Hmm.
And it was a sad thing. But that's what happened. He went home and started gaming on the EverQuest game, and he played it for like 3 months. He never went and got another job. I went and saw him He didn't like me going over to see him. He didn't want to let me in the house. Um, I felt like I was his enemy. And he didn't share a lot of stuff with me, but I could tell by looking at him, he was not shaven. And he'd say that he was going out to look for a job, but I
No.
doubt that he was. I don't think he was. He ran out of money and he started taking food from the landlord. And eventually the landlord evicted him.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, you can come back home, but I need you to go into some therapy first because you
Mhm.
got a problem here. And so he agreed to do that. So we took him into a therapist. And after like 3 times, I'm telling the therapist, I think it's from this video game. Because ever since he started playing this game, he's spiraled down in his life. And so this is like 6 months after he started gaming. So he's lost his job. Now he's been evicted. Now we're in to see this therapist. And this is in like 2000.
Mhm.
So nobody back then had ever heard of anybody having a problem with the video games. Well, this is one of those new games
Yeah.
just coming out. So nobody
Yeah.
even heard of those either. And so the therapist, talked to him a couple times, and then he says to me right in front of Sean, like, well, you should be glad he's not addicted to drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
And
That's good.
I'm like, with my mouth open, like, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And because I'm trying to get him off the games, trying to get him back into his real life. And so when we were going home, Sean looked at me and he goes, see, Mom, this is your problem, not mine.
Yeah.
And so he thought that his gaming was fine, that it was just me, it was my problem. I should just let him do whatever he wants and leave him alone. Um, and he even told me, he said, I just want to play games the rest of my life and you can support me.
Oh, great job.
Yeah,
Great plan.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm like, are you serious? Yeah, he was serious.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I have 4 children, and guess what? That's not happening, you know. Um, and so that time was really rocky for us. Our relationship really went downhill because I was like wanting him to get off the games. He wanted to be on the games. And so there was that disagreement there. And it was near Christmas. And finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I said, you're going to have to go because this isn't working and you're not making any, attempts to better your life. You just want a game. And that's not happening in this house. And I knew he had some money saved. And so I took him to the local motel.
Mhm.
So he had enough there for a couple of weeks. And he was actually pretty excited about that because he could sit there and do whatever he wanted. He
Mhm.
didn't have a computer there though, because
Ah.
the computer was at my house. And uh, I also found out around that time that there was a program in our county called the Long-Term Support Program,
Uh-huh.
where they help adults who are having trouble being independent.
Mhm.
And so I was able to get a hold of them, and they did an evaluation with him and they accepted him into the program.
Mm.
And I was so relieved, I know God was helping, God was with us, through this time. Um, and so I was really grateful, and he agreed to go into the program.
Okay.
And so he got in there and they put him in a group home, which was
Mhm.
great. There was no computers there,
Mhm.
and they monitored him. They got him into his doctor, made sure he was taking his medications. Um, he was still restless. Um, I think probably because the games weren't there. But I
Yeah.
found out that he was actually walking to my house, which was about 5 miles away.
Five
It's,
miles.
yeah, and sneaking into my house in the middle of the night when I was sleeping to play the games on my computer.
Wow.
I found out because one night I just couldn't sleep, and that's not like me because when I go to bed, I'm asleep. And it was like at midnight, something like that. And I just like said, oh, I'll just get up and check my email, which is really stupid because I just don't do that. So I'm in there checking my email and I heard our door open, our outside door open, and I'm like freezing. I'm like
Mhm.
freaking out. I'm like, who is coming into my house, at midnight? I mean, I was looking for the bat and everything, and here it's Sean. I'm like, what are you doing here? And then, things started falling into place. Here he's sneaking into my house at night or when I'm at work, coming over to the house and using the computer so he could keep gaming. And, I'm like, well, it was eye-opening
Yeah.
for me that, he still was wanted to game. And he was actually his therapist in that program. I talked to him about the gaming. I said, I'm pretty sure it's from the games that, he's having this problem because he had became depressed.
Mhm.
He stopped looking to the future. He
Yeah.
stopped looking to the future of his life.
Mhm.
He stopped planning. He stopped, thinking about, well, what am I going to do with my life? He just wanted to be in the games. That's all he wanted to do. And so when I'm talking to the therapist, I'm talking to him and I'm thinking, I think it's from the game, and still I didn't know that this game was different.
Yeah.
I didn't know yet. And this time this therapist said, well, yeah, he goes, yeah, I talked to him about seeing what he liked to do. He just likes to game. He said, so we'll just let him game because that's what he likes to do.
Oh.
And I'm like, really? I mean, I don't think I said this to him, but in my mind, it's like, okay, so you tell an alcoholic, well, all you like to do is drink, so you can just keep drinking.
Even though it has destructive effects
Yeah.
on your life. Now, and the reason, because now we're talking about you, who you were not a therapist, you did not have a background in any type of therapy work or anything. You were just an IT person.
I've been in recovery for a long time, and
That's
I
why.
knew what addicts were like, and he was acting
Exactly.
like any other addict that I saw.
That's why you knew that something was different, something was wrong, but you were ahead of your time in terms of recognizing that it could actually happen with video games and not just substances.
Yep. And I remember thinking through this struggle, I'm like, I had in my head, okay, now if my kids get addicted to drugs or alcohol, this is what we're going to do because I've
Mhm.
got my experience to lean on. But never in my life did I think, oh, if my kid gets addicted to video games, this is what I'm going to do. I mean, that never crossed my mind. So when I'm seeing it in front of my eyes, I'm like, what do I do? That's where I was reaching out for help from the
Mhm.
professionals. And I just did not get any at that time. I mean, I even went to the cops. I went to the emergency room. I talked to the doctors. I wanted to get him committed, and they're like, no, just tell him to not be on the computer so much. The
Mhm.
cops saying, well, we can't do anything unless he's going to harm himself or somebody else. And I had talked to him about, if he was going to harm himself. And he's like, no, I've never thought of doing that,
Oh, he denied that. Yeah. So,
Right.
and then, and you, I think just listening to what you did and the sequence of what you did, that you had tough love. You did respond with boundaries. I mean, you didn't just tolerate it indefinitely. You didn't give him money to support him while he played on video games. You didn't listen to his excuses. I mean, you actually did everything that you could do in response to that because you couldn't physically take it away from him. He was an adult, but you didn't make the computer available to him conveniently. And when you saw he was coming into your house, you got him into a group home where he had supervision.
Mm-hmm.
You did really well in terms of all the options that you had.
Yep. And then once he got into the group home, he was there like 4 or 5 months. And then he got another job. He was doing really well. He
Mhm.
was going to the doctor, taking his meds, and and um and then he told them that he wanted to go out on his own and get his own place. And they're like, well, that's great because that's what their job is, to help people be independent.
Yep.
Me and his stepdad are like, no, no, he needs to be around people. He doesn't need to be on his own, that's when he would, fall into no discipline, not taking care of himself.
Mhm.
And but they didn't listen to us. They said, well, if he wants to do this, we're going to let him do it because you're not his guardian.
Right. He's
So,
an adult. He gets to choose.
so
Exactly.
he went, and a couple months after he was there, he got his own computer
Mm.
because he said he needed the computer because he was going to get Microsoft certified
Okay.
so he could get a job in the computer business. And that was in August. And after he got that computer, never saw him, wouldn't let anybody in his apartment. He had a caseworker who was supposed to be checking up on him. He wouldn't let her into his apartment. Um, his sister tried to go visit him. I tried to go visit him. He wouldn't answer the door. And this went on, you know, I had at that time my first grandson was born, so I had other things I was, concentrating on. Um, but the job he had, it was a good job. Again, it was at another pizza place, but the people liked him and everything, and he seemed to be doing fine there. Um, but on Halloween night, I got him to come over, and this was the first time he'd been over in a couple months.
Hmm.
And he wanted to tell me something, and I'm like, because now by this time had started withdrawing. He stopped seeing his real life friends, which I didn't really know until afterwards.
Hmm.
But he was having a hard time telling me. And it took him like 10 minutes. And finally, I said, well, you need to tell me what's up. And he's like, I stopped taking my medications. And that was Halloween night. And I'm like, why? And he's like, because that was his answer.
And that was the epileptic
Yeah,
medication,
the epileptic, because by then they had diagnosed him with depression,
depression.
schizoid personality.
Hmm.
That is not schizophrenic, it's schizoid. It is the personality of a video game addict. This means you're
Hmm.
antisocial.
Yep.
Um, you have a tendencies to not want to be around other people. And that came about from the games.
Hmm.
The depression came around because of the games, because he wasn't depressed before he was into the games like that. So he was taking medications for that.
Okay.
So several different ones. And so I'm like, in my head, I'm like, why would he stop taking his medication? And so then on Monday, I called up his caseworker, and she's like, oh, yeah, I haven't seen him since August. The only time I could see him was if I went to his job and we could talk a little bit on the sidewalk. And I'm like, he goes, but I couldn't tell you, because of patient privacy.
Oh.
Uh-huh. And I said, well, you need to do some follow up with him because he's falling in between the cracks here. He's not doing good. He's stopping his medication. And she's like, yeah, okay. So then she got an appointment with him after Thanksgiving. So that was the start of our downhill spiral. um, he told me that he was getting, well, actually, it was the week before Thanksgiving. I was calling his job because I needed to talk to him because he had disconnected his phone, and they said, well, he's not here. And so then I waited and I called them again the next day, and they're like, well, he's not here again. And finally, his boss called me. He goes, what's going on with Sean? Because he's not showing up for work. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I went over to his place. He wouldn't answer the door. So I actually had the landlord open the door for me. And I asked him what was going on. And he's like, oh, I got a different job. And I'm like, really? I said, you didn't even tell your boss? And he's like, well, it wouldn't matter anyway. And I didn't know what that meant. but I had my phone and I said, here, you call your boss and tell him that you're not coming back there. Because they were really good to him, you know?
Mhm.
And so he did. He called him on my insistence and, just told him. He wouldn't let me in his apartment. I could kind of see around it. He had the chain across the door, and I could see that it was like a mess, really mess. Also, a weird thing was like when he just moved in there, it's like 6 months before, I had asked him, I said, well, you're a good cook, I said, I think you should invite me and Tony, that's his younger brother, over and make a meal for us. And he's like, okay, how about the weekend before Thanksgiving? I mean, that was in June.
That's a
Okay.
big book. That's a full calendar.
I'm like, okay. I didn't want to discourage him or say, why so long? But anyway, when I went to see him that weekend, when I saw him, he's like, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be able to have you over, for the meal. And I'm like, what is he talking about? And then I remembered from 6 months before. I'm
Wow.
like, oh, okay. Here he remembered that. I didn't, but he did. And I'm like, okay, so then, he said he's working at the local Walmart. And I said, okay, well, we're going to be going to your aunt's for Thanksgiving and I'll pick you up and then we'll go over there. And he's like, yeah, okay. I said, but we need to set up a time, how am I going to get in? Because you got your phone unhooked and everything else. Um, so I need to see what day and what time I'm going to be here. So I'll need to talk to you. And he goes, well, just, come to my job. So I went to his job on Tuesday, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and they're like, well, we don't have a Sean Woolley working here.
Oh,
And I'm like, what? And so then I'm like, I went back there and he didn't answer the door.
yeah.
And again, I went and got the landlord and she opened the door, but the chain was there. And she's like, that chain shouldn't be on there because it's a fire against the fire laws.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, well, anyway, I was knocking and everything and he didn't answer. Um, he didn't come. I went and pounded on the windows. He didn't answer. He didn't. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to break in. I'm going to, let him have his dignity. He's going to have to talk to me on Thursday. So that was Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
So I had to work Thursday morning. And so I went back to his apartment to get him. And I knocked again and he didn't answer. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to get the landlord again. But I'm just sitting there and I tried the knob, and here the knob was still unlocked from the day before. And then I'm like, then I opened it as far as I could and I could smell something.
Oh,
And then I'm like, oh, this isn't good. And I went home. I didn't call anybody because I knew if the police came, they wouldn't let me see him. So I went home, got the tools. I came back and I broke in.
really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, I had a screwdriver and a ply ply thing that you
Yeah.
can
Why
break
did you want to see him?
because they wouldn't let me see him. I knew they wouldn't let me, and I had to know. I had to know
What
this
happened?
is my son,
Right. You wanted
and
to know exactly
I
what
knew
happened.
the cops wouldn't even let me in the room
Yeah.
because that's how they are. And I'm like, no, I have to see what is going on here. And so I did that. And it was such a long ride. I mean, even though my house wasn't that far away, maybe a mile,
Yeah.
just seemed to take forever. Because by then, I mean, we still had, a couple months before that was when we had talked about if he was going to take his life or anything. And he said, no, nobody in our family had ever committed suicide,
Mm.
you know. Um, so when I broke in, then I opened the door, and he was sitting in front of the computer with the video game on it,
Okay.
and he had a rifle next to him.
Oh.
And at that time, there were other children who were killing their parents.
Oh.
And I'm like, I didn't know if he was going to kill me
Hmm.
because our relationship was not good.
Wow, it was that bad.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And, you know, I just looked and I saw that game and I got out of there
Hmm.
because I wasn't taking any chances.
Right.
And so I went and got the landlord again. He used to be a medic. So he went in and then he came back and he told me, he said, he's gone. And I just collapsed in the hallway.
Yes.
And, and I knew from the way he did it that he was sending me his own message. There was no notes or anything
Hmm.
that it had to do with the video game.
Oh, yeah, that
To
makes
sit in
sense.
front of the computer
Right
with it
there.
on.
Yeah.
And so when the cops came, I said, you make sure you get a picture of that computer with the game on it, with him sitting in front of it, because this has something to do with that game. And they're like looking at me like I'm out of my mind, because back then, nobody's ever heard of it. But they did.
Hmm.
And that's what they wrote in the report. And I said, you better put it in the report too. And so they did. And that saved me later on. Um, but, that was just something I never thought would ever happen.
No,
I felt, I always felt responsible for my children, whether, no matter how old they are, you only want the best for them.
of course.
And it's like for him to decide to do that. So when I was there on Friday, when he wouldn't let me in, he
Hmm.
had already bought the gun
Yeah,
and he didn't want me to see it because if I saw it, I would have stopped it.
right.
So he didn't
Absolutely.
want me to see it. And I'm like, the game messed his mind up so bad that he would rather kill himself than to ask for help.
Right. Or to live without the game
Yeah.
or whatever happened in the
By
game.
then, by then, I found out this afterwards. Something had happened in the game
That's what I just said.
um,
Yeah.
in the end of October that he stopped playing the game. It was so devastating to him. We think it was from a relationship
Uh-huh.
that he had stopped. So that was like 2 weeks afterwards. And, then his life was completely empty. There
Hmm.
was no place to go for help.
No hope.
There was nothing in his real life. Yeah,
Right.
no hope.
Yep.
He had stopped going to church. He had stopped seeing his real friends. He
Hmm.
had put, you know, all his future into the game that this is going to get him through the rest of his life. And then again, this is the second time he was, totally uh
Betrayed
disillusioned with the
something. Yeah,
game.
something
Yeah,
happened. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And if the game is that important to your existence and who you are, when something happens in the game, I mean, it's very similar to it happening in real life. There is no distinction. And, the suicide rates are higher in teenage boys and teenage 20s, especially early 20s, because they're not completely mature. Their reasoning, their frontal lobes are not completely developed, and so their problem solving, their reasoning, and their impulse control are not developed. And then the games also prevent that from developing. And he had ADHD, so he also struggled with some of that in addition from that. But it was the to me, the thing that is so significant that I loved about reading your book, and I was going to skim it, but I read every word and I was just pulled into it because how you presented it and the way you presented about Sean was, it was so easy to see the direct effect of those games on his life, and not that it wasn't from other things. It was just, it's so clear. And it's so much worse today that this is, I mean, I just applaud you for being on the forefront of recognizing the addictive quality of these games and for really managing his addiction so well. So we're going to do a second. Well, I was going to integrate some of this in this podcast, but I think we'll wait and talk about what is so dangerous about them and what's going on with the brain. But I want you right now to talk to the person that is listening, the parent, the spouse, the sister, the brother, that has a family member who is caught up in this gaming and does not know what to do. And then maybe you could also tell them about your 12-step program that you founded.
Okay. Well, after Sean died, and that's when people started coming to me. One of his boss's friends was a newspaper reporter, and his boss, who knew Sean before he started gaming and saw what happened to him after he started, told his friend that he should probably write an article about this, warning people about the video games, that they can be harmful to people's lives. And so his friend called me, and it was just a local paper, and I'm like, sure, I'll tell you what happened, So I did. I just did an interview with him. He put it in the local paper, and I just thought that was going to be it. Well, it just so happens in our town is the relatives of Jack Thompson, who is a major attorney who sued video game companies for violence. It wasn't addiction at that time, but it was pretty much the violence. And he's the only attorney in the whole country that has ever taken them to task. Mm. And his in-laws live in our town. So they saw the article, mm-hmm. and they sent it to him, and he called me and he said, do you want to file a lawsuit against these people? And I'm like, well, what would be the purpose of that? And he's like, well, we want to, make it public that these games are dangerous. And, he said, well, maybe you could get like $1,000 or something, And I'm like, I know enough about lawsuits, I'm not into them. But I said, I was more of getting the public informed, so I said, okay. I said, I'd consider that. And after that conversation happened, somebody picked that up, and then the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel called, and they wanted to do a more in-depth article, which I agreed to do. And that was like about a month after our local article went out. And I watched the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel article go around the world.
Wow.
And what I was saying about having the police document about the games with his death, they would call the police department and make sure that it had something to do with the games, and it wasn't just me saying that.
Oh,
so,
perfect.
So they had it on record.
And you made them put it on record. You made them write that down. Oh, you were so
and they had the pictures.
Wise. Yes. Yep. Yes. Wow.
And so as I'm watching it, I'm reading the responses, and people are like, that's happening to me. Or, oh, our family's broken up because my husband's addicted to these games. I mean, thousands of people, it's affecting their lives just like it affected us. And it was like, but nobody had any place to go for help. There was no support.
Yeah.
and it's like a black hole. It's like, well, this has never happened before. Why is this happening? People don't know that at this time the gaming companies were doing it on purpose.
And I don't know if we said what year this was. We probably didn't say it at the beginning. Sean was born in 1980. So this was 2001. This is 2024. So we're talking about 23 years ago when we really did not know that video games were dangerous.
Right. Yeah. Up until that time, they weren't. But since then, it's been a free for all for the gaming companies.
Of course. Yeah. So you get all those people contacting you.
And I'm just like, they weren't contacting me yet, but I'm looking at them, like looking at these responses. I'm like, there's no place to go for help. Then I had my experience with my own recovery. I knew the 12-step program worked. And I'm like, God, I can start it. I mean, I've been in business enough. I can get a website made. Let's just see what happens, so that people aren't alone. So they know they're not alone. I mean, that was the biggest thing. If you have somebody else you can talk to about it. And then, if people have solutions, we can share them on the website and other people can see, but the biggest thing is that you're not alone. You're not the only one this is happening to, because that's what they all think, because they're spread out enough because of the internet. I mean, it's not just everybody in one town.
Exactly.
It's not the local tavern like the alcoholics are.
Well, but the other thing too, for parents, especially of teenagers and then 20s somethings, and I even know people that have sons in their 30s that are at home, not working, playing video games, but especially in the teen years and the 20 somethings, it's really hard to figure out how to control it. Like I've talked to people about, like my daughter, about keeping the video gaming stuff from the kids and even their phones, just with the addiction to phone, but all of their social life and their sports and the coaches communicate on the apps like Snapchat and TikTok, and all of their team does. So if you pull a kid off of all these things and those are benign compared to what we're talking about with the video games, you pull them out of the social circle and it makes it almost impossible. But what do you do when you have a child that is addicted to the video games? I mean, how do you do the tough love? Do you just have to kick them out? Do you try to intervene?
You do the tough love. I mean, the difference between then and now is back then the children weren't into it yet. It was the adults.
It's adults, yeah.
Because it wasn't that far yet. And so most of our people, our members were adults. And, so I started our organization. That's how I started it, the Online Gamers Anonymous. And, we've been going ever since. And I always said, well, if nobody else is coming, I'm going to shut it down. Well, that's never happened. So we're just going. We have tons of information out there since 2002. That's when it started. But today is different because now the babies are being acclimated to the technology. Yep. And it just goes up from there. And the younger you start somebody on a drug, the more susceptible they will be to the bad side.
Yeah, I've seen parents hand a toddler a phone to keep them occupied
all the time.
The parent is shopping or having a meeting or having a conversation socially. And I just look around, I'm thinking, they need toys. Kids need to play with things with their hands. They need to manipulate things. They need to be involved in the environment. They need physical activity. And the phone prevents all of that.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And I call it really lazy parenting, because the parents are trying to do this stuff and they're just trying to get the kid out of their hair. So they give them the phone rather than dealing with it, in an adult to child manner.
Right.
Here, just take this and leave me alone. Well, that does the trick. And one of the things that's come out is having technology-free homes. And, I know people who do that.
I mean,
And
no
it's like,
computer, no computer, no cell
yeah,
phone?
nothing. And it takes the elephant out of the room. All that disagreements, the arguing, the non-socializing is gone. And guess what you got left? You got people who need to talk to each other and interact with each other and be human beings with each other.
Like it used to be.
Yes. And I know people who've done it. I know families who've done it. And, you know, they're so much more well adjusted.
Hmm.
They're like real people instead of their kids just sitting there on the phone all the time. I mean, for me, I've always tried to do that when we have holidays at my house. I say, put your phones in the baskets on your way in. They don't understand why I do that. They
Yeah.
think I'm trying to punish them. I'm like, no, I just want to see your face. I want to hear you talk without always looking at your phone. And they're like,
Yeah,
well, it doesn't mean I don't like you. And I'm like, it's taking your focus away from,
exactly.
the gathering and each other. And they,
Well, let's go ahead and we're almost an hour. So let's go ahead and summarize and wrap up this podcast. And then we're going to do a second one that is going to be about the effects of video games and why they're so addictive. And
and
so,
more about what they can do.
yes,
I think I'm just going to say this. I want to say this. The biggest thing is how you, as the parent, handle technology yourself. You
mhm.
are setting the example,
uh,
and you need to monitor your own use and what are you using it for. And don't expect, your children to do stuff that you're not doing.
very wise advice. Yes.
Yes.
And I think parents may not realize how addicted they are to their own phone in terms of
Yep.
picking it up, checking it, looking at it, watching things on it. And that is an example. So your website is www.olganon, OLGANON.org.
Or
I'm going to put that in the show notes. And you have it's Online Gamers Anonymous, and the Olganon, that is for that's for the family members, right? Or is
right.
that for both?
The website is for both. The way we have it set up is Olga is for the gamers and Olga Non is for the family members. But the website is set up for both. But
Okay.
there's specifically, if you're a gamer, go here. If you're a family member, go here.
Okay, very
So
good.
we have a different section for each one, and there's tools and a lot of information under each section as
Okay.
to what you can do for yourself. Things we've collected over and over that work that other people have used, and so we just pass it on to other
And then
people.
do you have meetings for?
We have meetings. Yes, we have meetings, online Zoom meetings. We used to have face-to-face meetings before COVID,
Yeah.
but actually this seems to work better because it's more like around the world
Mhm.
compared to just in your local town.
Yeah. So I'm
And
sure that most of the people listening had no idea that your organization exists. I'm very familiar with 12-step programs and I've never heard of it. So I am just excited to be spreading the word about it. So thank you for being so honest. I still saw the tears in your eyes when you talked about your son taking his life. It has been over 2 decades and the pain is still there. We don't want this to happen to other people. Like that's why you're doing what you're doing. So thank you. And for those of you that are listening, look for the next show because we're going to be talking about stuff that you need to know. Even if somebody in your life right now is not addicted to gaming, you need to know this even for your children and other people and even yourself before you pick something up. So thank you for listening and please share this show with everyone that you can think of because it's super important that people know this. Thank you again.
all right, thank you,
Thanks,
Carla, for
Liz.
having me.
You're welcome.